Now, there have been some pretty dire warnings about possible budget cuts or efficiency savings, depending on your point of view. The Ulster Unionist Deputy Leader, Danny Kennedy, has warned the Executive could be forced to make savings of £600 million as part of the Chancellor's budget later this week, which could see cutbacks totalling £15 billion. With me now is the SDLP Leader, Mark Durkan, and Danny Kennedy. Thanks for joining us. Danny Kennedy, you've issued this warning. Why are you picking this figure of £600 million, and when do you think that would take effect?
Well, I think we're increasingly concerned in this week when Alistair Darling will tell the House of Commons and confirm just how bad the nation's finances are in as a result of his administration and management of it, and Gordon Brown. And I think the concern is that they will look for what are called efficiency savings, but are better called cuts. And that will squeeze on regional assemblies like the Northern Ireland Assembly, and we're simply highlighting our concern in that, and the worst case scenario, 600 million. And so I think we would be wrong were we not at least to highlight a concern on that, and to work and to signal that we are willing to work with others in addressing these issues should we be confronted by them.
Well, you put this question to Peter Robinson earlier today about looking at the budget again, and he seemed to suggest that if there were serious cuts to come, that this would mean that Gordon Brown had gone back on a pledge to give stable finances to Northern Ireland over a sustained period as devolution got off the ground. But he didn't seem to therefore be too reassured that there wouldn't be cuts.
Well, our overall concern is that the pledges of Gordon Brown as Chancellor and now as Prime Minister are rendered effectively meaningless and worthless. And I think everyone accepts we're in a changed economic climate, but I think we have to be aware of that too. We were promised the mother and father of a deal in terms of government finance as a result of devolution in 2007. That really didn't transpire. And those promises were broken, and with no reason to believe that Gordon Brown is in a position to underwrite our resources in a way that needs to be done at present.
Mark Durkan, you'll be there presumably to see the budget. Do you think Northern Ireland will have to take its share of the pain then?
Well, we'll have to see just how the budget is going to be presented, and often with new Labour budgets, even with Alistair Darling, it has often been on day 2 or 3 that you find out the precise detail of what's actually there. So the small print of these budgets sometimes takes a while. We don't know what the headline hit is going to be, whether there will be one at all. Maybe we've all been softened up in these terms, but we know that whether it's this year or next year, that certainly there is a price that is going to have to be paid in public expenditure terms as well as taxation terms to pay for the scale of the bailout that there's been for the banks, to pay for the very, very high rate of borrowing that has been undertaken.
Does the Northern Ireland special case argument hold any water any longer, to say, it's a fledgling devolution and therefore we should be protected?
I think the case does hold water, but it doesn't convince a lot of people in Westminster and Whitehall. And one of the things that we need to be seen to be doing is to be seen to be managing our budget as well as we possibly can. And this idea that the Executive adopted, that we're not have a budget process because we don't have any extra money and we'll only look at our budget if our budget is actually cut, is actually just inviting people to cut your budget on the basis that you're probably not managing it as well as you should be anyway. So we need to continue to make the case that we need the money. It would help if we weren't underperforming in terms of the high rates of capital expenditure that were promised. We are underperforming there, and when you underperform to that degree, then you're inviting an easy hit from the Treasury, who are just looking for drive-by cuts at this stage.
Danny Kennedy, I mean, the Treasury had already talked about £5 billion in efficiency savings. This extra £10 billion seems to be in the period from 2011 onwards. Now, yes, to be frank, it's possible that Labour will not necessarily be in power then, and your newfound allies in the Tories will be in power. Surely George Osborne has made it clear that he's going to match these cuts, or even put in place greater cuts. So, I mean, your own allies are going to be cutting Northern Ireland more than the current government, if anything.
Well, the reality will be that the next Conservative government will have to clear up the mess left by this Labour administration, and we'll have to examine the books when we get them.
But you will ultimately not be able to resist what appears to be, a stronger impulse from the Tories to make savings than even from this government if they come into power. And that's going to be politically difficult for you, isn't it?
Much will depend on what will be inherited by the next Conservative government. I think the Labour administration have made a hash of the nation's finances, and the sooner we get a general election, the sooner economic recovery can really take place under a new Conservative government.
I mean, Mark Durkan, do you think it makes any difference to our local financial prospects whether the Tories or Labour do win the next election?
Well, I believe that Northern Ireland would be better with Labour winning the next election. I think on the basis of the kind of commitments that we see to public services, the sort of balances that they've brought into public expenditure, I think Northern Ireland would fare better. We've already had a number of hostile indications from the Conservatives about possible looks at the Barnett formula in ways that would further squeeze the devolved allocation there. We could possibly have our discretion reduced as well, so even if the amount of money isn't reduced, the discretion we have on how we spend the money could well be confined. Again, they have signalled in that direction as the way of placating Middle England and to satisfy the readers of the various tabloids in Middle England or whatever. So I think Northern Ireland would actually fare worse under a future Tory government. But that's not pretending that the fact is no matter who is elected in Westminster after the next election is going to face massive difficulties in terms of the scale of borrowing that is going to have to be paid for and of course brought down. And that's going to have to be paid for in terms of both tax and spending squeezes.
Well, here in Northern Ireland, obviously, you've been saying that the executive here should revisit its own budget, and Peter Robinson today had some praise, perhaps uniquely, for the SDLP in terms of the fact that you've actually now come up with a plan as to what you think could be areas under which savings could be made or money could be raised. Do you think then that debate about refocusing the budget is about to begin?
Well, I hope it is about to begin, and I think it should be the Assembly doing its job. The Assembly is meant to be the budget authority. We didn't produce those proposals and just dump them at the Minister of Finance or at the Executive. We said we were prepared to get stuck in an exercise like this. Those were some ideas we had. We will work on others, and we're quite willing to look at whatever ideas other parties come up with, or indeed other sectoral interests come up with as well, because if we're going to respond to the difficulties that we're facing in our economy, just constantly reciting the mantra that, we have the growth in the economy as a priority in the programme for government, that's easy to say. And the fact is that's a priority in every programme for government, growing the economy. So just quoting that isn't enough. The real test is whether or not you are bending and stretching every means at your disposal in budgetary terms to make sure you are supporting your economy and protecting public services.
And what about the involvement of all the parties in this process? Danny Kennedy today, Peter Robinson announced the Cross-Sector Advisory Forum and the makeup of that. The ministerial members are exclusively Sinn Féin and the DUP. Is the Ulster Unionists happy with that, given the fact that your party leader is in charge of an important spending department?
Well, I raised that very issue with in questions after the statement to the First Minister. He assured me that the presence of the Employment and Learning Minister, Sir Reg MP, would be an important contribution, and hopefully that will now be rectified. And I think it is important also in terms of the Executive publicly working together in a cohesive manner. If it is, as we are consistently reminded, a four-party mandatory coalition, then let's prove that by seeing all parties involved in the major decisions of this Assembly and of this Executive. Because hitherto, what seems to be happening is a political carve-up between the DUP and Sinn Féin.